This is ST536, Fundamentals of Information Technology. I'm Rob Hepler. Today we're going to talk about output. Last time we talked about input. And this will be a little quicker lecture today. I think the concepts for input are about the same as for output. We talked about the barrier or the membrane between our analog wave reality, continuous signal, that's really what analog means, but we think of it in waves, and what the computer can do. Remember, computers don't know or do anything except what we tell them to do, and the only thing they know is zeros and ones. So all that input we talked about goes into the computer, gets stored somewhere as a 0 or a 1 in bits. Each bit can be a 0 or 1. String of bits is a byte, which represents a character, and then a string of characters can be words and so forth and so on, building it up to a database. Well, today we're going to talk about output devices mainly, a little bit about the concept of output, but as I say, crossing that barrier in the other direction, the concepts are pretty much the same. We need to think about, and we being engineers, human beings, what we can do to that data, that's the zeros and ones, the binary data, and once you have something in binary, you'll never be able to recreate the wave exactly that it originally came from. However, you can use software to manipulate that, the zeros and ones, and create waves and try to do things with them. For instance, to give you an idea, I have a bunch of vinyl records, and I bought a turntable which runs vinyl records, for those of you that don't know about them. And I was able to feed the output from that turntable into my computer, and it converted it to digits. Just in case you're not familiar with vinyl, one of the problems with vinyl was that they would get scratched, and they would have snaps and pops. You'd be listening to music, and it would go pop, and make all these background noises. Well, once you convert that signal to digits, you can actually have software then that goes in and removes the pops. Very easy to identify a pop because it's so different from the ambient music levels. So there's one thing you can do. You can also add bass, treble. There's a lot of things you can do before you then output the signal. So that's just something to think about. But we're going to be focusing mostly on the output itself and devices mainly. See if I can get my slides to advance. Here we go. There's my contact information if you need it. Here's some of the things we're going to be talking about. And one of the concepts we've been trying to talk about through many of our lectures is the idea of distance, location, is starting to become meaningless to us in terms of information and technology. This device, this thing here, which I think you can see, is a blank DVD. I know that because I look at the back and it has a bluish tint. CDs have a greenish tint when you look at the back. Other than that, it kind of looks the same. This can hold around 4 gigs. A CD can hold a lot less than that. And then there's Blu-ray, which is similar technology, but it holds much, much more than either of these technologies. The point I want to make is, when we talked about input, the zeros and ones, what's on this DVD? Could be a movie with music, soundtrack, a lot of things, but it's zeros and ones to the computer. So if I put this in a DVD player, it will then look at the zeros and ones and convert them to something humans can see, movie sound. So I have this thing in my hand, which is a DVD. Well, what if I took all those zeros and ones off of here and put them somewhere else? I uploaded them to something called the cloud, Amazon, for instance. I wouldn't need this thing here. The DVD is no longer necessary. I can click on a link to the zeros and ones as they reside at the Amazon cloud computer somewhere. And those zeros and ones will be converted and displayed on my monitor the same way they would be if it was a DVD player. So output is not really related to where you are. I just wanted to make that point as we move forward. You can take a look at these things on the screen. I'm not going to go over them right now. We'll talk about them as we go through. What I really want to do is talk to you about selecting output hardware, perhaps. So output is data that has been processed into a useful form. Some people would call that information. If you're showing people something, human beings, remember the computers only exist to serve human beings. That's all they do. Some output might go from one computer to another computer, but ultimately the intent, the reason for the output is to show it to a human being, which means it has to be an analog form of some kind. Those, all know these are outputs: audio, video, text, graphics. Those are all outputs. We can have output on a monitor like I am doing here. You are probably doing it on your monitor, computer monitor. Output on paper, output on DVDs, CDs, output in a sense on hard drives from one computer to another perhaps. Anything is data. Data is the 0 and 1s if it's coming from a computer. And processed by a processor into useful form. Makes sense. Here's a list of some output devices. One at the bottom here, some of these we'll talk about them later. Tactile output, game controllers, whiteboards. Well, yeah, those are output. Data projector, those are all outputs. So a display device, often talked about as a monitor, can show anything, any of those outputs except physical output like paper. A monitor is packaged as a separate peripheral. Remember, peripheral is something that plugs into the computer in some way, but not critical to the operation of the computer except in communication with humans. And so that's a monitor. All kinds of monitors, you've seen them all. You've seen them at airports. You've seen them all over the place. LCD is a technology that was the most recent. And I think we should talk about LED. LCD is liquid crystal display, and LED is light emitting diode. And this is really the most recent technology that we can afford. Although most of us may not be able to afford it yet, it's still much more expensive than LCD. But the technologies appear similar to us. We'll just talk about those for a second. This is an LED, and you'll have those LEDs on your Christmas lights now. Most people have them. Because one of the advantages of a light-emitting diode, and I'm not going to go over the technology so much, you just get the idea. Electricity is converted to light directly. They're used on Christmas trees because they don't give off any heat, or very little heat, I should say. And that's one of their distinct advantages. They use very little power because they don't have to generate a heat. That's what your light bulbs do. The incandescent light bulbs, they give off heat. They convert electricity to heat, which glows. LCDs give off heat as well, not as much, but as not much at all compared to light bulbs, but they give off some heat. They use fluorescent lighting, LCDs. And they don't ever turn off. If you've ever, probably most of you have fluorescent lighting in your schools and your offices. And as you know, it takes them a while to warm up and come on, and they have switches at the end that excite the gas in the tube and fluoresce the gas. And therefore, on an LCD screen, they don't turn those off and on. And each pixel, each dot on the monitor has a liquid crystal diode attached to it, and then it glows according to the signal sent to it by the computer. The computer sends the data, the monitor interprets it, one for each pixel, information for each pixel. Well, if the pixel's supposed to be off to show black, since fluorescent tubes don't turn off, or LCD, they just are covered, there's still a little glow behind it. LEDs can turn on and off without a problem, because it's just stopping and starting the electrical pulse. So they actually give you better, clearer pictures, LEDs, because of that. The LCD, when it's blocked, simulating being turned off, there's still a little glow, and you get bleed over, and so the pixels aren't quite as distinct from one another. That's a quick description, and if you want to know more, you can look it up or ask on the discussion rooms, and we can talk about it if you want. But let's talk about a couple of these other things. This is an LED. That's what's on your Christmas tree now. We use them now because they're cool. They don't start fires like the old incandescent bulbs did because of how hot they got. Over here on the left, though, they say television display types. Well, monitors are the same thing. We'll skip the first one for a second here. Here's a description of LCD. And you can see here's the fluorescence, and it's always on when the monitor's on. And that's why it takes a second to warm up. In fact, most of our TVs now, they have some power running through them 24/7, 365, just to keep those things fluorescent in the background and keep them so they don't take so long to warm up. And then there's these filters. Take that light and filter it in some way so that by the time it gets out to the glass, it's showing what the information it got from the computer, the data, the zeros and ones, told it to show. And this square right here was obviously told to show red. I hope you get the idea, and a mix of the colors. So here's the light source, goes through the filters in this direction, and then you see it on the glass on your monitor, on your TV. Plasma has its own light, and it produces red, green, blue, RGB it's called. And they have neon and gas cells, which emit light when charged, which is similar to fluorescent, but it's down to the cell level instead of a whole tube like this one, or like lights in the ceiling here. So each cell has its own gas, and then that allows it, depending on which gas gets excited, that's how they get the color mix. Red, green, blue can give you about any color. So gases and phosphor-coated cells right here. And you see there's rows. There's a row of red, green, blue. As it goes through there, it illuminates those in combinations to give a certain color for this display right here. The downside of plasma is they get really hot. I had an engineer up at Emertech one time get an ambient thermometer sensor and put it right close to a plasma TV we have up in Albuquerque. And it was over 100 degrees. You could put your hand up to it and you could feel the heat. It puts out a heck of a lot of heat compared to LCDs and LEDs. And of course, heat is one of the things that destroys small electrical circuits. Computer has a lot of cooling going on. Remember, we talked about that. So plasma, that's their downside. They usually have less of a lifetime than LCD or LED. And they use a heck of a lot more energy than LCD and LED. So probably I would not recommend using a plasma. I think it's technology that's still around. People use it. And it's best for huge displays, of course. It works best for those. It's cheaper than LCD, I believe, because of the technology. For big displays, I mean. And then there's LED. And this CRT, of course, is the old-style TV that shoots rays across the monitor in different color combinations. Really not much to talk about there. Very few of those are left. I think it's a challenge to buy one of those anymore. They're just not manufactured very often, at least not shipped to this country. You might be interested to know we don't make TVs in the United States anymore. We don't make any. It's made elsewhere. LED, light emitting diode, as we mentioned. So it has the light emitting diodes, these things. This thing, back here. And it's a similar idea. It runs through the filters in this direction as they all do. And it does a similar thing. The difference, of course, is LEDs, light emitting diodes, use very little power compared to the others. LCDs don't use much, but this uses even less. And there's no heat with LEDs. There's so little it doesn't matter. So that's an advantage. The other big advantage is the light can go completely off, as I said. So there's none of this bleed through. The picture's much clearer. The pixels have individual contrast between them. And the picture is much clearer with an LED. If you can afford it, that's the way to go. But again, LCDs have come down in price, as all technology does, the product life cycle. LEDs are at the top of the heap now, so a little more expensive. And people are trying to get rid of LCDs. You can probably get a deal on them as they ship in the LEDs. Although that boat might have sailed, but something to think about. LCDs are much cheaper now if you want to get there, and the technology is almost as good. The other one I mentioned here is organic light emitting diode. Unlike this LED, this is material that does the same thing as an LED, but it does it on sheets. In other words, there's no tube like this. There's no epoxy case, like this. It's just layers of film. But the idea is the same. These layers of film glow like the LED over here when the current runs across it. And it, of course, runs in this direction again. You can see the anode, cathode, red, green, blue again. And then this kind of gets the charge started, and it goes through the same way, and then this displays the image here. So the thin film transistor is what we're talking about. The advantage of these things is they weigh almost nothing, less than LEDs, and they can be curved. So I've seen these at the trade shows I've been to where they can run them around a corner. You can't do right angles, perhaps, but you can curve them around a corner. They're just remarkable, and they're thin. I saw one that was, I think it was a 1/4 inch thick. Samsung at a trade show in Las Vegas last year. And it's quite remarkable. And they use very little electricity. They're incredibly expensive right now, by the way. But it's interesting technology. You're going to see more of that. You're going to see video images just laid in all kinds of shapes and surfaces and to catch your attention. I believe airports will eventually go to these because they're so light to hang. And you can actually put them back to back and it'd still be thinner than a regular monitor. So you hang it in the middle and people look at both sides. So that's great technology, really expensive. Now you're not going to see much of that in the home market. Okay. When you think about LCD, LED, OLED, whatever you're thinking about, let me just draw LED up here because it's really the latest technology. You still look at these characteristics. The resolution we talked about with input, that's how many pixels, dots, how much information you're willing to store. The more information you store, the higher the resolution. But of course, that also means you store more and you have to move more data around. The response time, there were some problems with early technology with flat panel or high def TV that the processors in the process of displaying the image was so slow that you would watch one and the image would kind of skip once in a while. I've seen that on older TVs. So you might think about that. If you look at it and you wonder if it's skipping, it might be older technology. How bright is it? That's talking about that clarity I was talking about with the LEDs, not having the light on all the time, for instance. And the technology of how far apart, dot pitch, how far apart, how small are the dots and how far apart are they, and those kinds of issues. Is there any bleed over from one dot to another dot? That kind of thing, and then the contrast between the two. So you can think about those things. And of course, in all of these cases, the higher they go, the more expensive it's going to be. But there's certain limits. You have to have a response time that looks to your brain as if the video was moving smoothly. Plasma are best at that. They're very good at that. But they all have these issues. It's something to think about. If you want to do some research, you can look these up before you buy your next flat panel. So resolution, the number of horizontal and vertical pixels. And they're showing you a spreadsheet here, I believe. So the rows and columns in a spreadsheet could represent the dots, if you will, and the information about each dot would be in the spreadsheet cell. Is it light green? What is it? Is it black? Is it white? How bright is it? All those things. And this box if you right-click on your desktop and go to Personalize, it depends on which version of Windows, or if you're running a Mac, it's a little different. But you can go in somewhere and tell it the resolution you want on your monitor. In most cases, you probably want it as high as you can, and still fill the whole monitor. I mean, if you go too high and the monitor can't handle it, you'll see bands across the top and the bottom, or maybe even the sides. And I don't really like that. I like to see the whole display filled up, as I'm seeing here with this slide. But, you can play around with that. And of course, the difference is your video card, your CPU or GPU, it's called, graphical processing unit, will work harder the higher the resolution you go. And sometimes you need to experiment with resolutions when you're using projectors. If you're going to project an image from your computer, you might not want the highest possible resolution, depending on the projector. If you're having trouble with projectors, always lower it to 600 by 8. That generally will give you a usable image, no matter what you're doing. But you get the idea. Higher the resolution, or the more data you keep, the better the image is. Oh, and there's one more thing here. Get it back. Come on. Right here, they're showing you that you have two monitors in this computer, 1 and 2. And they're showing the desktop on 1, and on number 2, they're showing what's called an extended desktop. And you can tell Windows to do that, which means it's a separate image. You'll see the desktop wallpaper on that other display, but you won't see everything else. You'll have a primary monitor that have the icons and the desktop, and the other one is used for something else. I'm using it right now in here. We have a flat panel LCD, I think it is, up on the wall here so I can see my slides, and I'm using a second monitor here that shows that, because on this monitor all I see is the slides. Over there I see myself in the slides. Different images on different things, and that's what you're seeing here. That's called an extended monitor. Okay. Here, I was talking about this a minute ago, your graphics processing unit. Well, in some earlier computers and low-end computers, the video might be handled by your motherboard. If you can afford it, you want to get a separate graphics card so the CPU and the motherboard don't deal with this stuff. They just send the signals to the GPU, and the GPU generates the signals. All those things we talked about, you'll get a better image if you do that. Remember what this is. This is a radiator that's cooling off the board, because this has a processor in it, a graphics processing unit, but it's still a processor. It's a chip. And then there's transistors and so forth. You can see it's a board, and you would plug that into the expansion slots we talked about, and here's the key. You'd plug that in that end. And then these are the ports. Remember we talked about ports. This is the old VGA port. They're usually blue. And that's what a couple of years ago, that was the best. There was VGA. There's also SVGA and some things, but VGA. And that's probably the lowest now. S-Video, most of our computers have this, but we're phasing out of these types of ports. And we use S-Video occasionally because some monitors have S-Video ports. And it's a little better image than VGA, I believe. And then here's digital video input, or DVI port. They're usually white, and they have rows of dots just like the VGA. And of course those dots are holes where things called pins plug in, and then the signals carry on the pins. So that's the interface, if you will, between, if you want to think about it in those terms, the port, is the interface between digital and analog reality. And so the signal runs out through here. DVI was the best you could do, and monitors had that. And of course now my laptop, for instance, has HDMI. High definition HD media interface. And that's an entirely different looking plug, and you can look that up. You probably know what that looks like. I don't have an example here, unfortunately. But that's the video card, some people would call this, the graphics processing unit. And they mention HDMI here, although they don't just show one. Currently, we just purchased some new flat panel LEDs. And the computer we want to run those doesn't have an HDMI output, so we have an adapter we plug in the DVI, converts the DVI signal to HDMI, and then we run it to the computer. You can do those kind of things too, to the monitor. Okay. Plasma, up to 150 inches. As I said, those get really hot. Their lifetime, in other words, hours of operation, is less than the others. And of course, you can run your computer to televisions. Since my laptop has an HDMI output, I can watch movies on my laptop, run it through the HDMI cable to my high-def TV, and watch movies that way. To the operating system, I'm just telling you to create a separate monitor, monitor 2, the extended desktop, and I slide my Netflix window or my iTunes video window over to that monitor, and that shows up on my television. So you can do that kind of thing if you have the right connections and so forth. CRT, we have some of these around because I hate to throw them out. They're good backups, but they're not going to work with HDMI connections. They don't work with DVI. You've got to dumb down the digital video input DVI signal to get it into the monitors. They're hot, and they have lots of power. In other words, they're expensive to run. I keep them around as backups because I just hate to throw these things away, but you're not going to see these for very long. Their days are numbered. Printers. Now we're actually putting something on a physical output. The monitor's just light. So a physical output piece of paper or something. And physical medium. Hard copy is the phrase we use. Something you carry around. Landscape. This is landscape. This is portrait. Landscape, you think of trees like they show you here. You want it wide. And then portrait is like somebody's face. That's what they call a portrait. Think of a portrait in a museum. And that's the two layouts, portrait or landscape. And you all know about printers. I'm not going to go into them in great detail. If you're thinking about buying a printer, there's some good questions here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of them you might think about is wireless. This is a growing thing. Windows 7, and actually, I believe XP, but Windows 7 is very good at it. If you have a home wireless network, for instance, you can set it up so you have a printer on the wireless network. You get a printer that has a wireless connection. You can print to it from any computer that's on that network. And that's kind of nice. That means you don't have to run cables. You don't have to carry your computer into where the printer is. You just can print it from wherever you are. It's a great way to go, and it's not hard to set up, but you can do it. If you want to print envelopes, that's something to think about. I'll let you go through this. A paper we're used to 8 by 10. In Europe, they use something that's called A4, just for an example. You need to think about where you're going to be printing most of this print. In the States, doesn't matter, but in Europe, they have different size paper. So something to think about depending on where you are. Documents, photos, well, you can print whatever you want to print. Here's one. This one's connected to a network, so you can print from anywhere. Now you get the idea. Let's look at non-impact printers. Well, the first printers are like typewriters. They took that same technology of having a metal key strike a ribbon and leave the ink behind on the paper. Just like the typewriters, printing presses, all the way back to the Gutenberg Bible, that's what they did. A lot of pressure went, and you had a template of the letter, and then you would press down, and the ink would be moved to the paper. That's an impact printer. These are non-impact, new technology. Inkjet printer, probably what most of us have. They're cheaper than lasers, use less power. And the size, then they're very light, and they can be very small. And what we have here is DPI, dots per inch, or resolution, if you will, of the print. They don't call it resolution usually, but that's really what it is. How many dots per inch do you have? And what you see here The 300 dots per inch, if you magnify it, you can see it's fuzzy. The 600 less so. The 1200 is really crystal clear at this magnification. So you would say to yourself, that's fabulous, I need 1200 DPI. You're going to pay more money for it. Take longer to print because you're moving more data and you're printing more dots essentially. However, look across the top here. Do you really see a difference across there to the human eye? Hard to see a difference unless you magnify it. But if you're doing a resume, you probably want it to be as good as it can be. You know, and you can compromise and go to the 600, I think. But just so you understand what you're purchasing, what your options are there. Very interesting, not many people know this. The inkjet works by boiling the ink. That's how an inkjet works. There's a resistor inside the cartridge here, or on the printhead, I'm sorry, on the printer. No, it's inside the cartridge, yeah. Printheads, these things. And they heat up, causes the ink to vaporize. And the bubble, there's a tiny little hole that only allows bubbles out, and the ink passes through that. Drops onto the paper, and then hardens or dries. So the shape of the dots is specified by the printhead. The ink vaporizes and bubbles come off, and then where those bubbles go is the shape of the character. So that's the intelligence, the software, if you will, figuring out where to put that dot, let that next bubble escape, the next bubble of steam. That's what's happening. Kind of amazing when you think about it. A firing chamber, a lot of violence going on in there. But it works very well. They're quiet. There's no printhead. One of the things about impact printers and typewriters and so forth, a lot of noise. But very little noise except the head moving is what you hear, the paper moving. And, of course, as you all know, printers are very cheap. It's these things that they get you on. They're very expensive compared to the price of the printer. It seems like you got to buy them so often. It's just amazing. The whole industry growing up around third parties refilling these cartridges and selling them at a cheaper price than the originals. My mother, for a while, was making her own. She bought some ink in a syringe, and she was refilling her cartridges. So I never thought it was worth it, but it's available. That market is there. Photo printer, it's the same thing. It's a printer. No different. Printer's a printer. The paper used for photo printers might be better and allows the ink to be absorbed better and clearer. But the idea is the same as anything else. And a laser printer, I mean, the resolution of a photo printer is usually higher, and there are other technologies available for photo printers, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the idea is the same. Laser printer, of course, has a laser. Most copiers now have lasers in them. So the technology for a copier is about the same as a laser. Very high quality laser. And you can, of course, do black and white, color, and they're very high speed. Now, compared to an inkjet, the quality is much better on a laser, but again, how much quality do you really need when you're printing letters on a screen? And how much speed do you really need? That's the idea. It's a trade-off. What we have here is a drum. The laser beam runs across the drum based on the data, the zeros and ones come in from the computer. And it converts those zeros to one like all output does into shapes, which many of them are letters. We call them letters. And the laser puts a static charge on the drum. That static charge goes through the toner. It's not actually called ink, it's called toner, just like a copier. And the toner sticks to stick to the drum. The toner sticks in the shape where the static electricity is. The toner sticks there. So the laser puts a static charge, the toner sticks just to where the static is, and then the paper runs across it, and so the ink sticks to the paper in that shape. Pretty amazing technology when you think about it. It happens for every line of the paper. I mean, laser prints the whole page at once, essentially. And the drum carries the image temporarily, and then when the static charge leaves, the drum's clear again, and the toner drops off. What toner's left that hasn't been transferred to the paper. And then we start over again. The advantage of that is, of course, if you think about it, with anything, with the inkjet, for instance, you've got bubbles moving through holes. It's not a continuous print. It's dots, which our brain then interprets as a constant image, and it looks like an image. This actually can produce a smooth image because there are no dots. There's no cells, if you will. There's no, it's a continuous image of the static symbol or pattern. And so that's what this is. You can see, you can think about that. You're printing the car as best you can. There's no dots in there. It's more continuous. So that's the idea. They still measure these, the resolution dots per inch, but technology isn't really doing dots per inch. It's doing a continuous image of each line, and then it prints it. Or some print the whole page at once, depending on the process. Okay, so this is another form of output. And the idea is the same. You get data from the computer, you interpret it, you convert it to something humans can see. So what I was talking about in that previous case, that's why the laser printer prints better quality. It's a continuous image. Many of us have these: scan, copy, print. Most of us in offices get these. You don't get just printers anymore. I haven't sent a fax in 3 years. Does anybody use fax anymore? I usually scan in the document, get a digital form, and email it to somebody. Occasionally, once in a blue moon, some company so far behind, they want a fax. But I haven't used one in a long time. A thermal printer, instead of using laser, heats up the substance you're going to put on the surface and then transfers it. And when I worked for Kinko's, I put together a what we call a Photoshop, photo printing, and it allowed people to come in and get, this was in the early days of digital photography, so we had a service. You could bring in your camera or your digital, your data, your pictures, if you will, digital pictures, and we would print them in high quality photo paper. And we used this technology. We tested thermal wax and dye sublimation. We used both of those. Kodak was making the dye transfer, I think, and HP was giving us the thermal wax. And we tried both of those, and they both were very good. I don't remember what we settled on. I think the dye sublimation was a little more expensive, but it had higher quality. And the idea, of course, is, again, there's not dots. We're talking about really just laying an image across. Works really well. They're both good technologies, and you'll still see these probably in high. I don't know what they have at Walgreens and Walmart. They may have one of these technologies to make the photos look much better, because this technology works better for a continuous image like photos are. They're not dots so much. I was able to get the printing shop in Salt Lake City for the Olympics when it was there, and we did a lot of business. Mobile printer, okay. Small, lightweight, okay. Label printers, you know what they are. It's a specially modified printer. Allows you to print labels because they're thicker or they have some surface. And they're just special purpose printers is all they are. Technology is the same. Plotters, large format printers. We also had I had a project at Kinko's. We put together a corporate printing facility, CPFC. I don't know. It's been a few years. And we were printing on these big major printers because, again, for small businesses, buying this device was expensive. We could buy them and have them in our stores, and then people could get these gigantic printouts done. I have a wall printing that I have from those days. It's a street scene in Paris, and you can put it on a whole wall. And we could do things that were on plastic that were clear, like you see on vans and those kinds of things. And it was a big business, actually. And we had it set up so that you could upload or email your original files. And then it was gone to one of our regional prints facilities. We'd print it and mail it out to you, rather than have these devices in each Kinko's. That was the idea. And it worked pretty well. It was a good concept. We did a lot of these things so we could be sold to FedEx. We were working on it back then. If you've ever heard the FedEx ad, print to Kinko's or print to FedEx, that was the project I did for Kinko's, one of the big ones. They're calling it, they said they invented it, but actually I did it. Impact printers, again, they strike like a typewriter. This line printer is what we used to use in the early days of computers. It would print a whole line at once, which means it had a print head, something striking for each column of a printout. In those days, we had 132 columns on a printout. They were the old computer paper size. And so one line would print at once. Boom! That's 132 print heads. And they would all strike at the same time. It was very loud. And then it would do the next line and so forth. But for corporations, remember, in those early days, it was difficult to get data up on a screen, for one thing. Believe it or not, that was a difficult task. This much data anyways, and get it to the right people. And the other thing was security. I think people liked having those printouts. They would take them into rooms and go through them. And then they would become doorstops when they're obsolete. And then you would recycle them, and the money from the recycling would go to a party fund. Fortunately, we don't do that anymore. Most of our data comes out on monitors. Printouts are just specialty things anymore. Dot matrix. There's little pins in the print head is like this. There's pins all through here, and the data, the output from the computer, the digits come. The printer interprets this and only has the pins come out in the shape it needs to come out. There's a dot. So for the letter A, only these dots would come out. The rest of the dots stay where they are, and then it strikes the paper or the ribbon. And people still print checks with these. It's hard. See, laser printers are great, but they can't print more than one copy at a time. In other words, dot matrix line printers can hit, and you can have copies. You can hit the front page with the ink, and then the copies, the duplicates, can also get the image. You can't do that with laser. If you want to have duplicates, you have to reprint it again. So dot matrices are still around for those kinds of applications. Audio output, that's another form of output. We all use it all the time. I just love music, so I'm constantly listening to music in the car. And now, of course, I think we've spoken about it before. I have all my music up in the cloud on servers or on computers, and I have it in various forms. I have Amazon. All my music is there, and that's about, now these days, over 17,000 tracks for me that I own. And I put them all on the Amazon server because it's included with my account there. I've had it so long. And then I did just recently, I joined Google's cloud music, and I can play all my music anywhere as long as I have a connection. So off my phone, I don't need to carry my music around. I used to be, I would constantly have to update my iPod. I don't have to do that anymore. As I add new music, it automatically gets put up in the cloud at Google or Amazon, and I'm testing them both. And I'm seeing which I like better. And it's a great service. So again, output, from my computer, the output was sending the digits up to their computer, which stored it on their hard drives. And I'm sure they're still using hard drives. And now when I go on my phone and say, play this music for me, I'm sending in output from my phone, which becomes input to the Amazon computers, which go and find my track and my account, this track, pulls the zeros and ones off, sends it over the ether to my set phone, and now the zeros and ones are converted by my phone, on the phone, to analog signals, and come out the speakers or the headset. Not many people listen to music on their speakers of their phone because it's not very good. But there's nothing more to talk about. I mean, you understand speakers are just converting the digits to waves so that our human ears can hear it. Of course, you can get all kinds of speakers, different quality, do different things. Surround sound receives a signal that has more than one audio track, and then it splits it up and sends it to different speakers. Again, that's the software manipulating the zeros and ones. But you know what these things are. Some speakers are specifically done to play audio from portable media. I don't even know what that means. I guess it means you can plug your thing in here. But of course, speakers will work with just about anything. Voice output, it's audio output. I don't know why they separate it, except voice recording, voice output has a lot fewer digits than a symphony orchestra. If you think about it, it'll make perfect sense. My voice has very limited range, and there's only one sound. When you listen to music, you're listening to back drums, you're listening to bass guitar, you're listening to trumpets, you're listening to cymbals, you're listening to trombones. There's all these different sounds, really rich, deep. You got to record a lot of digits to be able to re-record that. Voice, not true. Pretty much a standard, simple signal. And that's the only thing you think about. VoIP, that's voice over internet protocol. We'll talk about the internet, we'll talk about what internet protocol or IP is. But that's just sending the bits over the internet, and then they're received by the signal's received by your computer, and it's converted to voice. That's all that means. Phones are converting to VoIP. Many of us don't have standard landline phones. We use the internet, or VoIP, to send the phone signal. I'm trying to think. I just drew a blank. But you know who those companies are. They advertise on TV. They're much cheaper than Verizon. In fact, Verizon now is doing internet-based voice. It's a new form of output, and it's a new service. Projectors, interactive whiteboards, and so forth. Take a quick look at these. Projectors are something I know about because we have projectors in every one of our educational technology rooms, our smart classrooms. And many of our projectors use DLP, which is digital direct laser projection. Because laser light's is brighter, more coherent, and it works very well. We don't use much high-def projectors because one of the things we're doing now is sending wireless signals to the projector, not for standard stuff in a room, but that wireless allows, we get projectors that log onto our network, and then people sitting in the room with laptops that have a wireless connection can actually send their PowerPoints to the projector without plugging into it. It makes it much easier. So anyone in the room can log in, you give them the network capabilities, credentials. They log in, and they can show their PowerPoint, and then the next person can show theirs with nobody getting up from their seat. What we found, however, for right now, if you use high def, the signal is very, it gets bogged down. It's too much information for the wireless sometimes, and that's a problem. And you cannot show video over a wireless network either to a high def projector. It's very difficult. So it's got to be simple signals. Again, the idea of too much data running up the bandwidth. Talk about networking. So digital light processing, I got it wrong a little bit, but you get the idea. There's different kinds of projectors. Like I said, we use a DLP, and there's LCDs, and there's LEDs now too. Very expensive, but they keep getting cheaper. I mean, a VGA projector a couple of years ago was $2,000 for what we do here. Now you can get a DLP near high def wireless for under $1,000. It's just changed a lot. Interactive whiteboards, you've seen that in some of your classes. The math classes, for instance, Professor Stone uses a smart board where he stands in front of it and then he writes on it in some of them. I am using what we call a symposium. That's the name we give it. I don't know if you want to call it an interactive whiteboard. I guess it is. But again, this monitor is an output device because I'm looking at my slides on it. But it's also an input device because when I touch it, it accepts the input from this pen. But it's also an output device, again, because it accepts the signal and the CPU and then sends back a signal which draws the line. And if I change the color, it sends that color and displays it on the monitor. So it's both, input and output, thus interactive. And we need these for distance education. Without interactive whiteboards, it just wouldn't work as well as it does. And these are output devices. You've probably seen these. They call some of them tactile because if you're driving a car and you get in an accident, these things shake. They give you some, because you got in an accident or you're on a rough road, and both the pedals and the steering wheel shake, rattle and roll, that kind of thing, tactile output. So you're getting zeros and ones from the computer when the zeros and ones on the computer say the zeros and ones representing the car and the zeros and ones representing the tree collided, and sends back this signal that says, oh, you need to jump around. And the steering wheel jumps around. That's what happens. Input, output. That's the idea. Just to be, just to show you, output is output. It doesn't have to be organized. And you can go through these charts if you want to. I'm not going to go through them. It's the same idea as anything with computers. What do you want to do? What's your budget? And go from there. Because you can spend a lot on monitors if you want to. Your GPU, your video card. Gamers will just get the most expensive one they can get. If I think about it, there's a website that compares efficiency or how good the graphics are against price and helps you make a decision. I'll see if I can post that. And of course, output for, again, people that have special needs is very nice. We can do a lot with that now. There's Braille printers. That's what this is, printing the Braille, as you can see. And there's, converting, as I mentioned last time, I think you can convert text to sound. Computers now can read the zeros and ones representing text, convert that to a sound, and display it. And project it to you so you can hear it. Then you can make the monitors bigger. You can now, in most browsers, for instance, make things bigger, smaller, just by clicking some function keys. I think it's function plus minus on most computers. All those kinds of things. There's a lot of options now. Just remember, the zeros and ones being shown, the results of the 0 and 1 shown to those people is the same content as anybody's, but the software in between allows us to manipulate it, make it bigger, smaller, brighter, more contrast, less contrast, all those things. Okay, that's about all I'm going to say about output. We've covered a lot of these things. Look again for assignments, if there are any. Post any questions, comments in the online classroom. And thank you.